honors class on natives and drought-tolerant landscapes. So everybody here is obviously here because they want to lower their water bill and they want to know what they can use so it'll still look good even when we have these hot, dry spells, usually between May and 4th of July. So I've gathered a few of my favorites. There's many more. This is just a small selection. I would be here for hours if I brought them all. So I just grabbed my favorites. There's a few that got cold on the cart over there that are still very nice plants. They just didn't fit my look today. So to start out with, natives is kind of a general word we use to describe plants that would be natural in that area. So in Prescott, you've got your natives, like your ponderosa pines, your Apache plume, your various things that you would find if you were just going out on a hike. But we also, in a garden center, will describe a native as a desert native, a plant that will thrive in low water conditions. So when we say natives, we use it loosely. Sometimes we are referring to an actual native to this area, and sometimes we're just referring to a drought-tolerant plant. So we're going to kind of look at a few things based on who's going to be the least amount of water, the actual natives, and then the ones that if you want to add your landscape to add a little bit of flair, might need a little bit of water, but over a period of time will adapt to very low water conditions. So my very favorites are the things that grow wild in my house. If you knew where I lived 6 years ago, it was tumbleweeds as tall as I am. Not very tall, I'm only 5 foot, but still, 5 feet tumbleweeds is a lot. After years of raking and burning to get rid of the tumbleweeds, I've discovered some of these natural plants that are growing underneath, and they're awesome. One of my absolute favorites is this globe mallow, the yellow guy, orange guy, and sometimes they even come in pink or white. But the native you'll find around this area is going to be the orange one, the globe mallow, and you'll find it everywhere, Chino Valley, Prescott Valley, Paulden, just growing wild. But if you are lucky enough to not have it in your yard and you really want it, I love it. Say, hey, I know they have that plant at Waters, so you can come and buy it here. If we're out of the plant, we also carry it from seed. One of those types of plants that once it's established, takes care of itself, stays mostly evergreen. Even in the wintertime, you can still see this green foliage. And this time of year, they're full of orange flowers. Another great native that you would find just walking around out in the middle of the flat, hot, dry places, the bear grass. Plant this plant, give it a drink every once in a while, and oh my goodness.
Can you pick them up and show them?
Sure. Okay, this is your globe mallow. Great little native, perennial, evergreen. Most critters won't eat it, except for turtles, desert tortoise, they like to eat this plant. So if you have those, this is a good fodder for them. This is a big specimen. It'll get bushier. I've got some that are about maybe 2 feet across, usually about 2 feet tall, but you can see they're thinner at the top than they are at the bottom. If you cut them off, they tend to look a little bit fuller and nicer. This plant, if you water it too much, it will tell you it's not happy. It'll start to drop leaves and get kind of a rusty tint to it. So don't water him. Let him get established, then he'll take care of himself. We're talking water at planting, maybe once or twice a week for the first few months, and then backing off to once a week, and then by this time, a year later, he's on his own. Bear grass, I started to talk about him, grab him by his hair. Don't let it poke you in the eye. Evergreen, perennial, native to the area. Very low water use. Out in those places where it doesn't get anything other than rainfall, you can still find this plant. If you're going to introduce it to your landscape, though, you still have to get it established. Once he's established, low water.
Do you have to trim it?
You can trim it. If it gets too wet, you'll notice that it gets a little brown inside, and sometimes it'll get dead branches that fall off, or dead. These are actually leaves. The branches, leaves, whatever you want to call them, there are leaves. If they get ugly, cut them off at the base. You don't want to cut them on the tips because then it's just defeating the purpose. Another great native that I have at my house, now technically I had to plant it to start out with, but now it's in my yard and it pops up everywhere. This is called chocolate flower. And anybody have any guesses as to why it's called chocolate flower? It smells like chocolate. Have you ever had Nestle Quick? The little powdered stuff you add to your milk and stir it? It smells just like that. I'll pass him around and you guys can take a whiff of that. Great low water plant. Again, I started in with a little bit of water when I first put it in my yard, and now I have it popping up in the cracks of the rocks everywhere. And I don't even water, it just did it on its own. Artemisia, or sage. This is one of my absolute favorites. It's semi-evergreen. Most places it stays all year, but sometimes in the winter it will get a little gangly looking, so you cut them back. Such a soft plant, smells good, very low water use. Good sized shrub too. These guys can get pretty large. We have them anywhere from small varieties that'll stay like a foot or less, up to ones that get to be 2 to 3 feet, or even like a big bush sage, which would be even larger than that. But this is your Artemisia. This one's called Parfum, something or other. It smells nice. You can just kind of brush on it. The neat thing about these natives is not many critters really eat them. Salvia sage is not the same as Artemisia sage. So the Artemisia's the more native that you would find around here out in the wild, the undeveloped areas, and it can live a while. The salvia sage, which we'll talk about in just a minute, is, I would say, maybe 4 to 5 years on those. We tend to water them too much, so it actually shortens their lifespan. If you water them when you're getting them established and let them take over afterwards, then they will live more their natural type life, and you'll get a little bit better, a better longevity of them. Down below that, we have the one of the agaves that we're going to talk about. This one is the perii, which is a native. So a lot of these plants will have perii in the name. Perii was some botanist guy. Perii agave. Careful not to touch these things. They got a sharp poker on the end. Very fleshy plant. You would think nobody wants to eat this, but guess what? Javelina find these as tasty, juicy morsels. They can avoid the barbs and get into the flesh. So if you've got a javelina issue, be prepared to protect him with something that smells yucky or something that tastes foul, because this is a juicy hors d'oeuvre for critters like that. So you want to avoid that. Try some of those repellents. They help a lot. But it's a great drought-tolerant plant. Looks beautiful, and it always looks like this. In the wintertime, this is what he looks like. In the summertime, this is what he looks like. It doesn't matter what season you're dealing with. The agave is an agave is an agave. The cool thing about these is they'll roll off little pups. They'll send little roots out to have another one, or they'll have a little baby right underneath it. And that's how the plant reproduces. It'll just roll off another pup. So you can separate them and have more than one in your yard, or you can cluster them together. The key to low water use is to put like plants together and to let them cluster. So I have them grouped together. That way the water evaporation is reduced because the plant material is holding that moisture in. We'll talk more about that after I introduce everybody. Next to the agave, I have some blanket flower, or for those Latin speakers, Gaura. This comes in a various number of colors, anywhere from straight yellow, which I have on the other end, to red and yellow. You've heard blanket flower. It looks like an Indian blanket. Very neat. Yes, ma'am.
Could you just say the name of it one more time?
Blanket flower
Blanket.
or Gaura. This is a really nice little perennial plant. I would say the parent plant itself will probably last a few years in your yard, but it reproduces very vigorously through seeds. So you can grab seeds and put them around in other places. You plant one, and in 2 years you have 15 or 20. If you don't want them spreading, deadhead. Pull those spent flowers off so that the seeds don't drop and reproduce. They don't need a lot of water. If you notice on the side of the highway, you'll find that they use this as a reclamation plant in some places. They'll just throw it out because it will take into any kind of soil and just start to grow.
Did the animals eat it?
No, it's got that hairy leaf, kind of hard to swallow.
Oh, cool.
I've never tasted it, but I imagine it probably doesn't taste very good either. But it sure is pretty. Nice sunny. These stay in a nice low mound. I would say maybe a foot by a foot. If they're getting a little more resources, maybe a little bit taller. I don't think I've seen too many of these much taller than, say, your knee. So they stay pretty compact, nice, dense, love the heat. In my yard right now, they're just starting to show their little greens. I don't have any buds yet. But mine are a few years old, and they're in the Paulden landscape. It's a little bit cooler, although lately it's been warm, so they're waking up. all summer long. This guy starts now and he doesn't quit till it gets cold, or you dig him out and move him somewhere else. He
That
just
would be
goes.
okay in a big pot.
These can grow in pots. Now, something with a drought-tolerant plant, which I'm going to show you, is what makes a drought-tolerant plant is they have very extensive root systems. So when you pull this guy out, you can already see roots on him. So when he gets to the edge of his pots, the roots get thicker and thicker and denser. It's really hard to make sure that they get enough water to stay hydrated. Once they're hydrated, then they'll go for a long gap in between. Sorry about that. So if we want to keep this plant hydrated, get him good and soaked, and then let him dry out in between. He's had a good drink, he's nice and perky and happy. He could probably go for a couple of days. If he was sitting in the hot sun, it might be every day because there's nowhere for his roots to go. The bigger the pot, the happier he's going to be. Roots are the key to drought tolerance. Next to him, I have the red sage or the autumn sage. It comes with so many different colors. I imagine everybody here has one in their yard. This is a garden staple in the sunny spots of Arizona. This particular one is called red velvet. We get them in hot lips, which is white with red lipstick. Pretty cute. We even have a limited edition purple this year. It's down in the lower greenhouse. Very drought tolerant. This plant here in warmer situations, if our winter is mild, I've seen them stay evergreen. At my house, they go fully dormant. Each year I recommend when you have them in your yard, sometime between Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day, it's not a bad idea to reduce the plant mass by half. What that does is it rejuvenates the bulk of the plant down low rather than getting these long stringy parts. You'll have just as much bloom off of it if you cut it down as you would if you left it tall. But the plant in the long run will be healthier. These guys bloom on first year wood. So the first year that it grows out, that's where your flowers come from. So what's the point of leaving all that old wood on there? There isn't. Great plant for low water needs. Once he's established, I've seen them in yards that people have moved away. The house has been vacant for 2 years. This plant's still alive. Great plant, critters don't like it. Full sun, happy, happy. Salvia, or autumn sage. Yeah, the wood does get kind of brittle on these. So the fortunate thing is they do grow pretty fast to recover. So if somebody stepped on it, backed over it, fell on it, no pokers to hurt you, but you'll be sad because you broke his little arms off. He'll grow right back. Give him time. Next to my agave, I have one that many of you probably recognize. Does anybody know what this is?
Hens and chicks.
Hens and chicks. This is a cool plant. You buy one of these little rosettes, and in no time it looks like this, trying to climb out of whatever it's in. It just wants to spread. Now, a succulent has a pretty good root on it, but they store a lot of their moisture in their fleshy leaves. So, like I mentioned with the agave, fleshy leaves are tasty hors d'oeuvres for critters. And since these aren't as pokey, a lot of things will try to bite them because there's moisture. We have a weird situation that goes on here, usually in May and June when it's the hottest and the driest. These animals are thirsty. They're looking for anything and everything. So if you're looking at the list, things that they don't normally eat, they might even try it. Because this is fleshy, this is one they would try. So to protect it, to keep it looking good and happy, not so much the water, the repellents. Use the repellents to keep the critters away. He doesn't need a lot of water, he'll be very happy without it. One of my favorites, one of Grandma's favorites, one of almost everybody's favorites, lavender. Now we get all kinds of lavender here. I happen to pick this one. This is a Spanish lavender. You can tell because it has a much tighter, denser flower blossom on the end. The English and French lavenders tend to have the blossoms spread out. It's more like a whole bunch of little flowers scattered along the edge. This one's very dense. Very low water needs on this plant, very fragrant. And again, with that fragrance, means it tastes bad to critters. Although I've seen people put lavender in cookies. Cook with it. You can make it for little sachets to keep the moths out of your sock drawer or wherever you want to put it. These lavenders are really versatile. I've seen people grow them in pots. I've seen them grow them in the ground. I've seen them grow them on the windowsill. I've seen them grow them outside. You can put them basically anywhere as long as they're getting some good light, and they don't need a lot of water. Some of the varieties are going to be a little more tolerant than others, but for the most part, very versatile plant. Evergreen. In the wintertime, if lavender does not look like a green plant, something is wrong. Either you have a variety that's not winter hardy, or it's getting too wet. So if you see it starting to die yucky, cut off the ugliness. Make sure he's getting enough light, and stick your finger in there and feel how wet that soil is. If that soil feels kind of soggy, he's probably just getting too much water. They will bloom pretty much from spring all the way through fall. I've even seen them blooming a little bit in warmer winters. So it's a nice, versatile, look good all the time kind of plant. Doesn't need much water. It depends on the variety. Some varieties of lavenders I've seen get almost as tall as like my waist. Some of them are a little bit smaller. The cool thing is you can cut it. So if you keep trimming it down to keep it shorter, it'll get denser and broader. All right, this is kind of a big guy, and I like to incorporate this in the landscapes as sort of a background plant. This is called Gaura, and we get it in 4 inchers, 1 gallons, and bigger like these. This is a plant that will die to the ground every year, and each year it kind of surprises you by coming up and sticking its little flower head over top of something else. You're like, oh, I forgot I had Gaura, until you see these pretty little heads sticking out. And I just broke his arm off. Anyways, so he'll be hanging over the top looking around. Very drought tolerant. These guys can get roots that come up 3-4 feet away from the plant just because they're searching for moist places. Excellent to use in a naturalized landscape. You can put them in pots as a background plant. You could use them as a specimen plant. But if you notice, it is kind of have a wild look to it. So most people in pots like to put it with something a little more formal to cover that wild look. In a landscape, it looks great. In a pot, it's a great companion. Gaura. G-U-A-R-A. It might be G-A-U, but I think it's G-U-A. Perennial plant. Does anybody know what this is?
Yarrow.
Yarrow. We get yarrow in white, yellow, pink, red, all these colors in between. Cool thing about yarrow, extremely drought tolerant, extremely winter hardy. This stuff grows in Flagstaff. It's not going to get too cold here. I love the soft ferny foliage on it. Some of them are a little more silver, some are a little more green. Depending on what your desire is in the landscape, there's a yarrow to fit it. When yarrow's in bloom, it creates these flat landing pads, is what I call them. Perfect pollinator plant for butterflies. They can sit on top, gather nectar, rest for a little while, and away they go. Some species of butterflies will lay eggs in yarrow. Mostly it's a pollinator plant. In my yard, my yarrow keeps its green foliage, even in the wintertime, and starts to send out the flower pads in the spring. Long blooming, and even when the flowers have faded, they're still really interesting in the landscape. So you may want to add this. I have mine at the base of a fence post, and it softens that edge, and I don't ever water it. It's happy now. It's been there for about 4 years, and it's getting a little bit larger. I would say it's probably about 2.5 feet across, and the height on it, I would say, is maybe knee high. Very nice plant, low water needs, cool color, great foliage.
So it doesn't bloom all summer.
It'll start blooming now, and it'll bloom during the heat. In the fall, the blossoms are faded, but they usually stay on. So you'll have an interest there, a seed head, but not necessarily color. Now, if we have one of those warm springs followed by a good monsoon and then it warms up again, you might get another round of blossoms just because of the seasons that we have here. But generally speaking, this is a summer bloomer, and it's pretty long. This here is called Stonecrop, and this particular variety is Voodoo. I picked it because of its color. This is a nice juicy succulent. Juicy succulents are tasty, but they store lots of water in their fleshy leaves. This is a plant that in the wintertime should look like this. If he gets long, skinny sticks with a couple leaves on the end, he's too wet. Succulents will tell you when it's too wet because they drop those inner leaves. This is a pretty neat plant, full sun, low water, looks good all the time. When it comes to flower on this, it's not really grown for bloom, it's grown for leaves. We're going to revisit Gaura or blanket flower just to show you the other color. Bright yellow. Again, this plant gets about 2 feet by 2 feet. I wouldn't say it's a real long-lived plant, 2-3 years, but it's very prolific with seeds. It also has little babies that will come off of it that way. So you don't realize that it's not as long-lived because you have it for a long time because of the offspring from it. Blooms all summer, loves the heat, loves the heat. Hairy leaf, critters don't normally eat it, full sun. Not evergreen though. In the wintertime, you don't even know he's there. This is a plant I really, really like, and I buy it every single year. I wish we didn't get as cold in the winter so it wouldn't die. It can't handle wintertime here, but nothing is more stunning than purple fountain grass. When this stuff gets growing, you get these nice, long, elegant purple plumes of grass, and on top above it, these little wheat stalks that are kind of a blonde color. Gorgeous plant in the landscape, doesn't need a lot of water. Unfortunately, he doesn't survive our winter. If you lived in a warmer spot, maybe down in Dewey or Mayer, or you have it close to a building or nestled in some rocks, you may be fortunate to have this plant return in your yard. If not, they're readily available. You can buy them every year. They're not a super expensive plant, but very gorgeous. Excellent contrast to the silver foliage that you'll see on most of the drought-tolerant plants. So I like to put a little purple in there just to get some contrast. This is the one I would pick. I have a crazy cat at home. He's like 15 years old and he's half wild, I don't know. He's definitely not a normal cat. But every year I see him out there rolling in this stuff and he's got the stoner eyes going, meow, meow, meow. He loves this plant. This is called catmint. And if you were to rub against it and smell it, it smells really good. Great low ground cover plant. It'll spread probably 2 to 3 feet, staying pretty dense. I have some that get almost to my knee, but most of them are even shorter than that. Blooms all summer long. Purple flowers. Great, great plant. Low water needs. Super hardy, comes back every year. It's very reliable. It's nowhere near as aggressive as some of those Russian sages can be. Although the dormant or the dwarf varieties of Russian sage will stay small and less rambunctious in the yard. Catmint stays pretty much to itself, but it gets large. Returns every year. Reliable, beautiful, low water, smells good. Most critters won't eat it. My cat doesn't eat it, he just rolls in it. He loves it. Now I mentioned some natives are actual natives where you'll find them out in the wild. This next plant I'm going to show you isn't the most attractive in its pot, but in the landscape it's a stunner. This is a baby atriplex or 4-winged saltbrush. I have these at about 3-4 feet by 3-4 feet, big bushes, and they get this almost oatmeal type seed on it. Very tough. This thing was growing in my yard before people got there. It's a wonderful plant. It's drought tolerant. It can live on whatever Prescott has to offer. If it's cold, don't care. If it's hot, it doesn't care. If we don't get any rain, bring it on. I can take the heat. And clay soils, not a problem. This is a great plant if you want to get something larger in the landscape that's not as grand as a tree. I would say about people size in height and about 4 feet is wide. Great evergreen, low water, actually native to this area. 4-winged saltbrush, 4-winged saltbrush, or atriplex. If you mention either of those names, we could find it for you. It gets a little white flower on it that turns into that like oatmeal looking seed, which you can eat, and the deer actually do like to eat it. So this big guy over here, I don't know if you can see him on the camera. This is one of my absolute favorite. Fill in the landscape, need something big. Arizona cypress. He loves it here, hence his name. He's actually a native. It can bring on basically whatever Arizona has to offer. Full sun, wind, high pH, poor soils. This is a very fast-growing plant, very drought tolerant, and gets significant. If you're looking for something that's going to be above 20 feet, that's your plant. That is the Arizona cypress. Great landscape tree, perfect for windbreaks, property lines, or as a specimen. Next to him, I have the cotoneaster. This is the parnii. Remember I mentioned the Perry agave. Same thing goes with this cotoneaster. I would lift him up, but he's heavy. I'm already huffing and puffing. He's a big plant. I've seen these get to be about 8 feet in height. They are an evergreen. They're bright, glossy green on one side and silver on the other. Most critters won't eat it. It adjusts to the landscape very well, evergreen. I think that's everybody on this side. Now we're going to shift over to the side over here. This little darling. This is baby Regia prickly pear. Have you ever seen those hot pink flowers on a little cactus? This is your cactus to get those flowers on. Great smaller variety, not so much of the take over your yard. It is still pokey. It's still edible, so critters are going to want to munch on it. Pack rats, javelina. They do like it because it's very fleshy. It stores water in its pads or its leaves. And I like it in my yard because it's pretty and it's evergreen. Little bit tender on the coldest time, so make sure that you nestle it in some rocks, give it some southern exposure. Excuse me. It depends on the plant. Most perennials and drought-tolerant plants, if they eat the top part off, the root is still in, it'll keep growing. But if the javelina root it out of the ground and pull the roots out, and it's sitting on the surface, you can plant it back in and it may recover. A lot of these guys will tolerate something like that. But if they've eaten the whole, the whole bulk of it, you got to be out there right away to catch it so that you can put it back in the soil so we can get established again. This one right next to me is a beauty. This is another true native. If you're hiking the hills of Prescott, you're going to find this plant. Does anybody know what his name is?
Apache plume.
Apache plume, that's right. I wonder why they call it that. Great plant. I've seen these about, 3 feet. Some are even higher than that. It's not necessarily an evergreen. In my house, it loses its leaves. Some places in the woods, I've seen it where it still stayed. He's getting heavy. I'm going to have to set him down. At my house, he loses his leaves. I cut him down by about half, and then in the spring, he starts to regenerate again. Once he's established in your landscape, this is a plant that I would not water, only during periods of drought. So if we're talking May and June, we're getting into the 80 degrees and we don't see any rain, I'd hit it maybe once every week or two. If you have good moisture retention in your soil because you're using mulch or you're using aquaboost crystals or you're using xeriscaping concepts, you wouldn't even need to water that. I like to pair the Apache plume with the juniper blue rug. I like this particular variety because it stays low to the ground. It's very pretty, makes a nice carpet, great for erosion control, and it cools the soil of the plants that are around it. So if you have him planted with other things behind him, his little arms are going to shade the soil so that the roots of the other plants can expand out. Great additive to your yard. If you do these companion plantings, you'll have a lot happier plants. Blue rug juniper, we also have blue star, blue chip. We've got green ones, we've got green and gold ones. Juniper is a great plant to help with drought conditions because it can handle it and it makes a nice environment for the other plants around it. This particular plant here will probably get about 6 or 8 feet wide, but it won't get very tall. See how he looks like somebody sat on him? You can find juniper, they're anywhere from 1 inch high to juniper trees. When people hear desert natives, they think of this. This is a Utah agave, and it will grow wild here. You can find it. It's a tough, cold hardy, drought tolerant, but again, very fleshy. So some critters will use it as a source for water. Not so much for food, but for drink. This is a plant that wants some good drainage in the soil, so if it's sitting in a clay spot, don't water it very often or it will start to rot away. Utah agave. Nice clusters. This plant here I think is underrated. I don't think people give this the attention it deserves. This is a meadow sage, so it's in the same family as that autumn sage that I showed you. It's a salvia. This one's a little bit lower, a little broader spreading, a little bit greener leaf. It does not get that woody texture to it. It stays nice and short, but extremely tough plant. This plant, once established, hardly needs any water. It'll survive winter as cold as Flagstaff can offer, and it blooms and blooms and blooms. And did I mention it blooms? It keeps going. We have these from pinker colors to purple colors to dark purple colors. Some of them are even, I would say, almost white in color. This is a meadow sage. And this particular variety is called Sensation Sky Blue. I love it because it'll spread out nicely, makes a good, cool the soil kind of plant, but still looks nice. Now I pointed out earlier a silver friend to this plant. Does anybody remember what it was called? Artemisia. This is another type of Artemisia. This one's called Silver King. And notice it still has a nice soft kind of hairy texture to it, but it's nowhere near as lacy. So if you want a little bit different texture in your yard, great silver color, very low water needs, and most critters won't eat it. Silver King Artemisia, one of my favorites. Makes a nice kind of teardrop shaped bush. I've seen it get like this tall, so what is that, 2.5, 3 feet? Neat. Sometimes these bloom. When they bloom, I've seen them with kind of a yellowish flower, and some I think are a different variety, but I've seen with a little bit of a bluish flower on there. Baby Rita keeps poking me. This is a verbena. This particular verbena is a little bit different. Some people are used to seeing the more spreading ground cover sand type verbenas. This one's more upright. Again, very, very, very drought tolerant. Plants with hairy leaves, that hairy leaf actually helps grab moisture from the air and pull it into the plant. So when you notice something that's kind of hairy, usually that means it can take low water environments. This is a full sun plant, low water needs, perennial. It will die to the ground and come back next year. Drops seeds pretty readily, and if you notice the shape of the flower, it has a nice deep throat. Hummingbirds like to visit this plant. I love texture. This is a cool texture. Nice and soft. Caught a couple leaves in there. Very soft. This is blue fescue. Pretty tough little grass, great accent in a rock garden. Tuck it in between some stones, give him a drink to get him started, and then whenever you remember, give him another drink. It's not necessary to water him a lot. Once he's established in the landscape, he'll get a nice, nice little clump to him, but it'll spread out. I would say the largest I've seen this one in my landscape is about 2 feet. Usually they stay pretty dense, more like 1 foot, but I've seen them get a little bit larger, not very tall. Very soft, very rugged plant. Great up against a purple texture if you have, where's my fountain grass? Isn't that beautiful together? If you're into grassy look, here you go. Blue fescue. All right, we already talked about this one. We saw it in the yellow, the moonshine. This one here is a different color. This is called paprika. Yarrow. We mentioned it, the butterflies love it. Ferny foliage, see how this one's green? The other one was more silver. If you need something that's gonna take a dry situation with lots of sun, and you plan on going away on vacation for 2 weeks at a time or a month at a time, he doesn't care. As long as you come back and enjoy him later. This is a neat plant. The butterflies like it, low water. Paprika yarrow. This is a plant I had as a surprise in my yard. I threw out a wildflower mixture of seeds, and this popped up everywhere. This is also called Agastache or hyssop. And if you rub the foliage, you'll feel it has a rough texture. Most critters don't like it, but the biggest drawback for critters is the smell. I think it smells very good. Some of them are citrusy, some of them are licoricey. Either way, animals don't like it. It's in the mint family, has a square stem, great flowers, long season bloom, hot, 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 hot. Comes back every year, drops seeds, and all of a sudden next year you have 3 or 4 or 10. This is a cool plant. Buy one, and then you end up with 15 or 20 over the course of your yard. Agastache, hummingbird mint, hyssop, all the same plant. We get it in different colors, and some of them have a little bit different flower heads on there. This particular one is called Kudos Blue. I've got some of this that's getting pretty tall, but it doesn't get super wide unless you cut it. If you cut it, it'll get wider. Now the Acapulco I have is more of a tangerine color. It's pretty bright, and the blossom is a little bit different. Very citrusy smell. It's more bushy, where this one's more tall. Most people have this in the drought-tolerant landscape. This particular variety is called brake lights. It's a much brighter colored flower stalk. The standard red yucca is more of a pink color when compared to this one. You look at a red yucca and you go, wow, that's a neat plant. And then you see the brake lights and you go, whoa, whoa, that's extra bright. These guys are a little more compact, so if you don't like the size of the red yucca, this guy's gonna be a lot smaller. Evergreen foliage, so it's always got these green, spiky leaves. And then it blooms in the spring, in the summer, and into the fall. Hummingbirds love this plant. You know, all of our little red hummingbird feeders we have everywhere. Well, here's a red hummingbird feeder right here. Great plant, spreads through pups. So they have little babies roll off of it. Sometimes the root will come up and it'll do babies that way. Also produces a seed. We get yuccas in red, brake lights. We get them in white, we get them in yellow. There's lots of different yuccas for your yard depending on what flavor you prefer. Extremely low water use, very drought tolerant. I'm not going to pick this next one up, it's too heavy for me. He's just starting to wake up from his winter nap. This is a smoke tree, royal purple smoke tree. We also get it in golden spirit, which is lime green. I love the smoke tree because I like purple foliage. This is a great plant. Mine usually dies down to the ground and starts over, so mine's more of a smoked bush. But it's colder where I have him. If you wanted to keep his tree form, south wall, nestled in some rocks, somewhere where you've got some residual heat, and then you won't have the winter damage to this plant, you could wrap it with some frost cloth if it got really cold, or you can just let it be. This particular one, again, he's waking up from winter. He's starting to get his purple foliage on there. When he gets into bloom, there's this fuzzy pink all around him. It looks like he's smoking, hence the name, smoke tree, smoke bush. And then the guy right behind him, I can pick that one up. My husband's from Oregon. He likes pine trees and evergreen trees, and I said, well, how about a deodar cedar? This tree is also called a California Christmas tree. It has a very perfect form to it. Extremely graceful, nice big tree. These guys can get up to 40 feet, maybe even larger if it's happy, happy, happy. But in generally speaking, we're talking 30 feet, 40 feet is not an uncommon instance for this tree. Very low water, very good tolerance to wind and desert soil. It doesn't like to be overwatered. This guy here is really happy, pushing off a lot of new growth. Very perfect in its shape. This is a great tree. If you need something large in the landscape and you want something that's more of a visual specimen plant, this is the tree for you. Deodar cedar. We also get in a smaller, more compact variety called a golden, and it'll look like this, but it has yellow tips. I would say it's about half the size, so 15, 20 feet max. Golden deodora.
It's soft. Is it soft?
The needles are softer, but they are pokey on the ends. And then a landscape wouldn't be a landscape at my house without a little bit of honeysuckle. I love honeysuckle. Hall's honeysuckle is evergreen, even in Paulden, down in the cold spots. Evergreen, fast-growing, drought-tolerant. Critters don't want to eat it, but look at the blooms. And if you could smell this plant, I'm going to set him on the table when we're done. He's already been spoken for. But you can come smell it. I don't think she'll mind if you took a smell off of her plant. I planted one about 2 years ago, and it's grown to cover a chicken coop that's about 8 feet by 6 feet high. One plant. Super fast growing, very drought tolerant, and it happens to be evergreen here. So not only are you getting a flowering plant, you're getting evergreen, drought tolerant, and gorgeous. Nothing better than a honeysuckle. So now I've kind of shown you my favorite plants to use in the landscape. We've got lots more in the store. Different varieties of juniper, different varieties of perennial flowers. If it's a sun plant and you're curious if it's drought tolerant or not, just ask. Most of the stuff we carry here is for Prescott area. So we want to keep it where it's going to be a little bit wise to our environment. We do live in the desert. Yes, ma'am?
What's that plant that you wadded up in your hand again?
Oh, this is Gaura.
Gaura.
Gaura, and then there's a little piece of lavender on here.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just
The
little
Gaura.
scraps.
Okay.
Gaura is the hang over the top peekaboo
Right,
plant.
right, right.
So if you start to find the plants that you like the best and you want to incorporate those into your landscape, we want to kind of talk a little bit about xeriscaping or low water design. It's not about just the best plant for the spot. It's your part as planning where it goes. So we have to kind of be a little bit aware. We do live in the desert. So we like this plant, we want to grow it, and we want to grow that. We want a landscape that looks nice. So I mentioned earlier about companion planting. Cluster your plants together in groups. Find textures and colors that you like together and plant them near each other. Give them a little bit of room for expansion, but let them shade each other. Big plants shade small plants. They all shade each other's roots. That really helps. Mixing mulch into the ground when you're first planting these new plants, inside their containers, they have pretty rich soil medium. That's why they look so nice from the greenhouses, because they're in this good soil. But our soil here is not so good. So we have to make that transition. So that's why whenever you're buying a really good plant, and you take it home and you stick him in the ground, sometimes he doesn't thrive. Well, to help him thrive, you want to give him every step you can. So we mix in a little bit of mulch, organic material. Mulch holds moisture. It just gives a little bit of space for the roots to reach into. Plus, as it decomposes, it adds nutrients. So if you mix a 1/3 mulch into your native soil around your planting beds, then those roots have a place to kind of feel out and go. The other thing you can mix into your soil to kind of boost things, we call them aqua boost crystals. They have mycorrhizae in it, which are little fungus that attach to the roots that make the roots reach out even further. And they have little water polymers in them. They actually hold the water in longer. Those do eventually degrade and break down over the course of about 2 years. But by the time that plant has been in the ground 2 years, he's pretty much set. So mixing the mulch and the aqua boost crystals kind of helps. Companion planting helps because they're shading the surface. Adding mulch as a top dressing does tremendous things. Mulch is an insulator. You put it on the top of the soil, it shades the soil, so any of those weed seeds that are hiding in the dirt don't get the light that they want to grow. The sun doesn't cook that soil, so it doesn't get as hot. Or maybe in the wintertime, it doesn't get as cold because the mulch holds the heat for the winter months. But the best thing about mulch is it holds water. And all these plants need water. If they're just getting started, they're going to need a little bit more than they are when they get established. Once they're established, every 2 weeks is usually enough. Some of them don't even need that. But that's because their roots have gotten down and they found every little alternative that they can get. The last thing you can do when you're planting things to really give them a head start is to get those roots going. We want to get the roots growing. What can we do to get these roots going? adding the mulch to the soil, adding the aquaboost crystals with the mycorrhizae, and adding some rooting hormones. Rooting hormones, like in Root and Grow, that adds a little bit of delicate fertilizer, soft, that stimulates those roots to get moving, gives them the nutrients that they need without causing a burn. Anytime you get these plants going more roots first, you're going to have a longer living plant. Annuals are gorgeous. They're only designed to last 1 year, and they're all about, give me the best I can get on top. Flowers and leaves are pretty cool. But these annuals grow in little tiny buckets. They don't have a lot of root. If you want it to live longer, let them get roots, deep down roots. So we talked about companion planting, we've talked about adding mulch and mycorrhizae and aquaboost crystals and rooting hormones, and picking their best varieties. The next thing you have to consider is, where in your yard are we putting things? Are you putting things down low where the water's gonna run past them so that they can tap into those natural runoffs? Or are you putting up high on top of a windy hill where there's no water that's ever gonna hit there unless the rain comes? So do your part by planning. If you have a spot that isn't very good for water, adding some rocks or other things that kind of add crevices for the plants to get a drink from, or shady spots where they can get a little bit cooler, that helps a lot. The best thing you can do is, by doing your homework, picking the right varieties, putting them in the right locations, and doing your best to get them established. Once they're established, your yard is going to be lovely. Do we have any questions? Yes?
So you take a pot and you're gonna plant it outside, and when you take it out, it's got that root ball.
Yes.
What do you do with that? Do you leave it, or you break it up a little?
It depends on how dense that root ball is. So if I pull it out and I'm seeing nothing but white roots, I'm gonna kind of break them apart with my fingers. Some people will actually score it with a knife. I don't want to go more than a 1/4 inch on that. I really just want to break them apart without doing too much damage. So if it's got too many roots in its little container, that plant is overgrown. He should be on the markdown bin. Excuse me. But if he's got roots that are reaching the end and you can still see some soil, that's enough where you can just tease it with your fingers. I usually just break it apart like this, and in the ground he goes. But I don't want to plant these drought-tolerant plants too low in the soil. I want to make sure that they're sitting at grade or slightly above. Because when the water comes, the water pools into the center of the plant. It's going to cause the center to get too much moisture, when in reality, we want the water to go just to the root zone and slightly beyond, so that the plants go out farther. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Does that blue juniper, does that add to the pollen?
So, when you have an allergy like I do to juniper, it's a male plant that does that. So male junipers will produce pollen. Whether you're getting a male or a female, you have to buy it during that time of year and look. Junipers are junipers. You got a boy, he's going to produce pollen. You got a girl, she's going to produce berries. You just got to look.
Do the big prickly pear cactus down in the desert, do they survive?
Some varieties of prickly pear are hardy here. Most of them are going to be, I would say, tender to about 10 degrees. So if we're going to get below 10, protect that plant. If it's going to be above 10, you might notice a little bit of damage on it. But for the most part, I would say 10 degrees. Again, depending on the variety. I couldn't tell you.
There's a small one.
This one here, Baby Rita, is about 10. So out where I live, I would nestle it in some rocks. And if it was going to be really cold, I'd maybe throw a bucket over her so that she wouldn't get so cold. Anything else?
That little purple sage that you get down
The
here.
meadow sage.
Yeah. Now, if I have a bed that has autumn sage and red ones, would that one overwhelm?
No, it's smaller. So the autumn sage is going to get a little bit taller, and it's going to be more of a bush, where this is going to be more of a ground cover.
But would it take off water or all
No.
the nutrients away from those?
I wouldn't worry about it. I think they would be fine together as a companion. Yes. I've seen it pretty high. I don't know.
Can
if
you
I've seen it
repeat
as
the
high as
question for the people on live stream, please?
The question was, will the Apache plume grow at about 6,000 feet? And And I've seen it growing in some of the higher areas around here. And I would say I would expect it to go dormant in the wintertime at that elevation. I would imagine that it would come back every year as long as it didn't get super, super cold down in the root.
What about rosemary? I've heard about that.
Rosemary, that's one of the plants that I didn't put up on the table. I thought about it and I said, you know what? I imagine everybody's already got some rosemary. Rosemary is extremely drought tolerant. It loves the sun and it's super easy to grow. There's some varieties of rosemary that are hardy to -10, -20 degrees, so they'll grow great here. And some are only hardy to about 20, but they make beautiful carpets. It is a very good desert plant, very versatile. Bees love it. I'm always clipping a piece of my rosemary off and throwing it on the chicken when I barbecue. I just stick a sprig on there when I'm cooking, and then when I'm done, I just throw it away. But it is a really good plant. I just didn't put it on the table because I didn't have room for everybody. Anybody else have a question? I'm seeing hands kind of thinking about going up. All right, so to recap, the best things that you're going to do for a desert garden or a desert landscape is to do your homework. Pick the right plant varieties. You can stick with native plants or you can go with drought-tolerant plants. You can do your planting by grouping things together, companion planting, adding amendments to the soil at planting time and at the surface of the soil. And then, of course, establishing your deep, infrequent watering. If you water your plants every single day, their roots are going to sit there and wait for more water. If you water them deeply, but infrequently, the water goes down in the soil and the roots will follow it. So we don't want to water these plants every day. If we water every day, they're just going to wait for more. They become spoiled little plant children. We want them to be tough, independent plant children. We want them to go find their own water resources. So we have to train them to do that by watering just at the root zone and beyond for that first year so that their roots reach out. I do see a hand up.
I have a rock yard.
Yes.
Will these plants still grow if there's just rock all around?
So if you can make a hole in that rock
Yeah.
so that you can put a plant in there, but before you put the plant in, I would fill it with water and see how long it takes that water to go away. So if you're drilling a hole in granite and you put water in there and tomorrow that water is still there, it's not going to drain enough for these guys. But if that water is gone within 6 hours, that plant will grow in that spot. Just make sure that he's got somewhere for roots to expand. Rocky pieces, yes. Solid rock, maybe not.
Our garden appears to be about 10 years old.
Okay.
So that red sage is really thick.
Woody?
Yeah. Can we cut that back?
Yes. Okay, so she mentioned that she has a 10-year-old yard with some very established, mature salvia, the red salvia. She says that it's very woody and stocky. You can cut that back, trim it back. I like to reduce it every year by 50%. Every year I'll cut off a little bit. If it's still green, I reduce it by maybe quarter rather than a half. Because we don't want to take away the food that those leaves are producing. So if he's woody right now, go ahead and do some selective thinning cuts by reaching in and removing some of those old branches, but leaving some of the smaller ones. Try to keep it to a quarter or less. If it's dormant, you can cut it really hard. Any more questions that we have today? All right, I didn't bring in a lot of mentioning of drought-tolerant annuals because they don't get the roots. Usually when we use annuals in a landscape, we'll put them in pots or as something that we replenish every year. But there are some annuals that make nice additions to low-water gardens. The calibrachoa, the petunias, the geraniums, they're all great additions. Snapdragons are one of those plants that kind of falls into the I want to be a perennial category. They're really inexpensive, really readily available, but they do great as accent plants. So don't forget to add a few of those when you're doing your planting. I'm so glad all of you came here today on Earth Day to celebrate low water use.